Hi, welcome everybody. You can find a seat. We're going to start in just a moment. I'm Eliyahu, and it's my honor and privilege to introduce one of our CTeen leader committee members, Ella Backman.
Hi everyone, my name is Ella Backman and I'm proud to serve on the CTeen Leadership Committee. Closer. Thank you so much for joining us for this event. We will hear from the Holocaust survivor, Dr. George Schwab. Dr. Schwab was born in Latvia in 1931, and we will have the chance to hear his story shortly. Before Dr. Schwab comes up, I would like to say some interesting things about him. He is an American political scientist, editor, as well as an academic and pro. He co-funded and was president of the National Committee on the American Foreign Policy, which is the American nonpartisan foreign policy think tank. Dr. Schwab has also received many awards throughout his life. He received the Decorated Order of the 3 Stars from Latvia in 2002, the Ellis Island Medal of Honor in 1998, and the Elie Wiesel Award in 2018, awarded by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Most recently, he authored his memoir, Odyssey of a Child Survivor. He will be interviewed by his grandson, Michael Schwab, and Michael is from the Upper West Side, and he grew up here, and he actually went to the same middle school as me, so I'm a Schefter, so that's pretty cool. And later, he graduated from Heschel and is now currently a student in the University of Pennsylvania. As they speak, we'll have the opportunity to hear their stories and their journey through life as 2 significant figures. So thank you both, Dr. Schwab and Michael, for taking time to come and speak with us. And now we can all get ready to hear Dr. Schwab share his incredible tale.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. So nice to see all of you. And thank you to my grandfather for being here. Thank you also for the introduction. So I wrote a few questions for my grandfather. And maybe just to start, Papa George, you were born in 1931. So I just want to know a little bit about your background growing up in Latvia, in Riga and in Libau, your parents, your brother. What was your life like leading up from when you were born until the war?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. As the introducer mentioned, I was born in 1931. I'm all of 91, a youngster. And I was born in Latvia, in the city of Libau. It was a city of about 65,000 people and approximately 9,000 Jews. Our language in Kurland, as we used to know it, was basically German. I grew up in a rather well-to-do family. My late father was a Berlin-trained gastroenterologist pre-World War I. He was the one who introduced insulin into Latvia in the 1920s. And my mother was a professional cellist until she married, and then she played at home or not in professional settings. Life in Libau, Liepaja and the Latvian, was very, very good for Jews. I had one anti-Semitic incident because I went to a Latvian school when the teacher said I was asked to read a poem, and Latvian was not my native tongue. At home we spoke German. When my parents didn't want me to understand something, they spoke Russian. So the yenta that I was, I picked up Russian because I didn't like the fact that they were hiding things from me. So anyways, life was really very, very good. I went to Latvian school. My older brother by 9 years, he went to a Jewish gymnasium and basic school. He unfortunately was killed during the war in 1944, as was my father in 1941, when he noticed that the SD, the caravan came to pick up Jews. He sort of said to the fellow Jews to hide, etc. He was caught, tortured, and I was knocked out, and he was shot in due time. It was not long after the occupation of Libau in end of July 1941. And the rest of us, eventually we were incarcerated into a ghetto, in the Libau ghetto, where I worked. I was a runner for the commandant of the ghetto, the German commandant, because I was fluent in German, which was my native tongue. And we didn't have it too bad while we were in the ghetto. We did not starve as yet. We all worked. My mother became a laundress for the Air Force. My brother was still not killed. He was still alive. He was a kind of an auto electrician. I don't know how much he knew about this, but nevertheless, the ghetto was dissolved. In 1943, we were shipped to a concentration camp in Riga, known as Kaiserwald, and it was a concentration camp that did not as yet have crematoria, etc. But most of the Libau Jews were killed already in December 1941. So by the time we got into the ghetto, we were about out of 9,000 Jews in Libau, in the ghetto, and I was a runner, so I knew the exact number. We were a little bit over 800 Jews left from about 9,000. And of the 800 Jews or so were shipped to Kaiserwald, to the concentration camp in Riga. And my brother was shipped off then to a work camp, and I was able to join him because of a bribe that my mother arranged through a former Latvian patient of my father's. So until 1944, in 1944 we were shipped to the Stutthof concentration camp, where I had to work right near the crematorium and building the road to the crematorium, etc. And it was also in 1944 when my brother was separated from me and killed in Stutthof, which is near Danzig, the concentration camp near Danzig. And then we were shipped as the Russians were approaching. We were shipped to Germany, to Stutthof near Danzig, which was also crematorium, etc. It was really a very, very bad place. How I survived, I don't know. It was just a miracle. And in April 1945, we were shipped by barges to Germany, deep into Germany, because the Russians were approaching and they needed some workers over there because the Germans were incurring enormous losses, manpower. And I was apparently at that time 12 years old. I was still able to work, despite the fact, that I was starved to death nearly. So they shipped us on barges to Germany, and I was liberated in Germany, Neustadt-Holstein, on a few days before the end of the war by the British. And I was so starved, I begged a German soldier to give me a slice of bread. He said, "Why don't you walk over? There's a British tank, an American tank, and he will give you some food." And on my way to the tank, I saw, a pile of ammunition, etc. And I mistook a bar of soap for bread. So I picked up this bar of soap and tried to eat it, not realizing that it was soap. I was so starved I could hardly move. And then I finally moved over to the British tank, and I got some cookies. And a few days later, I collapsed and I was sent to a hospital. The Brits took me to a German hospital where I quote unquote recovered. I was there for a few weeks, sent into a DP camp in the place where I was liberated, and then I had a relapse, and I was again hospitalized for a number of weeks until I regained some strength and was then returned to the DP camp in Neustadt-Holstein. That was a place where I was liberated. All the details are in my memoir. And then I was sent to a rehabilitation place for children on the Warburg estate in Hamburg, where there were other kids, and they received some instructions from Chayalim, from soldiers of the Jewish Brigade. They started to teach us something about Palestine. There was no Israel as yet. We started to learn a little Hebrew. We're being trained for Aliyah Bet, because Aliyah Aleph was where we got 1,500 certificates a year from the Brits to leave for Palestine. 1,500, I mean, what was that for the survivors? Next to nothing. And on this Warburg estate, we're trained and instructed by the Chayalim, by the soldiers of the Jewish Brigade. They taught us Hebrew, and they prepared us for Aliyah, for illegal immigration. Aliyah Bet, not Aliyah Aleph. Aliyah Aleph was for those who got the certificates, 1,500 a year, etc. So we were being trained for Aliyah Bet, illegal immigration, some military training, which we received. And of course, while being taught, we were being taught, that the Brits, even though they liberated us and were our liberators, they did not really permit us to immigrate to Palestine, so they were semi-enemies, not full enemies, as semi-enemies. After all, they fed us and they gave us clothes, so on and so forth, but they didn't permit us to go to Palestine. And I developed this animosity toward the Brits for not permitting us to leave for Palestine. So eventually, later on, when I met my mother in Berlin, I was reunited. I didn't know what had happened to her. I was reunited in Berlin. And over there, I joined some radical Jewish movements, not yet the Stern Gang, that came later when I became a chaver of the Stern Gang. This was here actually here in New York. We came to New York in 1947, February 47, and I was, and I didn't like to study. As a child, I failed almost every single course in school. I had no patience for nonsense.
Yet you demand that I get good grades.
Huh?
Yet you demand that I get good grades.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, a relative of mine, we lived with an aunt and uncle in Borough Park of 40th Street, 1214 40th Street, between 12th and 13th Avenue. And I was enrolled in New Utrecht High School in Bensonhurst. And that was a hotbed of Zionist activities. And it was there that I got involved first with Beitar, Jabotinsky, and Beitar was started in Latvia way back in the early 1920s. But Beitar was not radical enough for me, because because I was really anti-British by that time. So I veered toward the Stern Gang, and we were being trained here in New Jersey, assassination tactics, what to do with what we call the kelim, the tools, pistols, guns, etc., etc., on a farm in New Jersey, and I was eventually assigned to help assassinate the British rep here at the UN. It never came to it. The reason being, after the state of Israel was declared to be a state, a sovereign state, Ben Gurion and Shertok, originally Sharet, they agreed to partition Palestine into two parts. Transjordan became Transjordan independent, no longer part of Palestine, and what happened was that the Stern Gang justified killing Ben Gurion and Sharet, in other words, fellow Jews, for agreeing to separate, to divide Palestine into the western part and Transjordan, etc. And for me, the idea of killing a fellow Jew was simply incomprehensible after we have lost millions and millions of Jews. And I took it upon myself to say no to Stern Gang, and I quit Stern Gang. I was enough of an individual with independent thinking. I could not bear the fact that I would go and shoot a fellow Jew because a fellow Jew made this agreement with the Brits to separate Transjordan from Jordan from Palestine, and it became Transjordan at that time. So I quit.
Curious, very quickly, Eula Goldberg was someone you've mentioned to me several times.
Oh yes, Eula Goldberg. After my brother was shot, Eula Goldberg.
Who is he, and where do you meet him?
He was from Libau, a former patient of my father's, etc. And he said, "George, you're now all alone. I will try to help you however much I can," which wasn't very much, but nevertheless, he did a lot for me. Eula Goldberg, his wife Shayna, who was a niece of Yitzhak Ben Zvi, the first president of Palestine, of Israel, and they left for Israel early, managed to get a visa for Eula and Shayna to go to Palestine. And I met my mother in Berlin, and but before being in Berlin, you know, I was basically a street boy for nearly a year. A street boy.
Along with gambling,
Black
right?
marketeering. I tried to escape the horrible past. First, I escaped into the world of pleasures. Later on, into the intellectual world when I came and started studying here in college, etc., etc. So I was, I would say, a street boy nearly a year. Black marketeering, among other things. I relate this in one chapter called Street Boy. And then I graduated. I made high school in 2 years over here. I didn't take it very seriously, but I managed to graduate. And I took an exam, an 8-hour exam to get into City College, which I managed to pass. I don't know how come, because I considered myself, because of what I went through, etc., I considered myself a man of the world. Studies were really irrelevant. I considered myself a man of the world. Anyways, but I had some excellent professors, also at New Utrecht High School, who introduced me into the writings of Shakespeare, which I began to like, despite myself. I didn't expect to. And then at City College I had a few extraordinary professors. And I suddenly began to be interested in reading books, because I thought I knew it all. The illiterate me, I thought I knew it all, etc. And I started to read more and more and more and more. And this became then my world, my intellectual world. And my mother kept on encouraging me how proud my father would have been. My father was at Berlin, before World War I, Berlin trained gastroenterologist, who was the first in Latvia to introduce insulin in treatment of patients with diabetes in the 1920s. And my mother kept on saying how proud Papinka would be of you, that you're interested to pursue the studies, and how proud my brother would be of me pursuing these studies. I graduated City College with honors for things, which I never expected, because I was this know-it-all, a non-entity, intellectual non-entity. And then I got a scholarship to go to Columbia. I never thought I would go on to Columbia, but I got a scholarship from City College to go to Columbia. And I made Columbia in 1 year, my master's degree. And then I went on for my PhD degree at Columbia. And that's where my teaching career began. I began to teach. I was invited to teach at Columbia. Out of the blue. So I did, but then I got a much better deal from City College and subsequently the Graduate Center. So I was teaching the ancient history because it was not my field, but it was my hobby, the ancient world, the ancient Greece, the Hellenistic period. My field was really modern and contemporary European history and diplomatic history, which I was teaching, etc., etc. And eventually I got my PhD. Enormous controversy surrounded my PhD dissertation. I had to write 2 dissertations. The first one was not accepted because they did not accept my interpretation, and despite the fact that it was not accepted, I had to do a second one, which got me involved into foreign policy. But the first one, which was rejected at Columbia, became a classic in the field, has been translated into Chinese, has been translated into Japanese, has been translated into Italian, parts into Greek, German, etc. So
there's an opportunity there for a minute just to note that you've always spoken about and lived the idea of finding the silver lining in things. For instance, that you had a lot of setbacks, but you weren't
yes.
held down by them.
No, exactly. I was going to teach Columbia's lesson. So not only did it become a classic, about the individual I wrote, very controversial legal and political theorist and constitutional lawyer, I decided even to translate 3 books from German into English, which the University of Chicago Press is peddling and doing very, very well. Actually, one of the translations, which was brought out in 1996 by the University of Chicago Press, has sold by now over 50,000 copies. Can you imagine? One of them. I mean, I'm not even talking about the others. So anyways, the second dissertation dealt with neutral countries and nuclear weapons, and that got me involved into foreign policy. And then I was invited.
It's just a child, it's not me.
Lovely. Lovely. I was invited by Hans Morgenthau, father of political realism in the world, in international relations, father, to be a co-founder of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. He died 4 years later, and eventually I became the president of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, and was its president until early 2015. And what we did is a lot of track 1.5 and track 2 diplomacy. I was very instrumental in the peace process with Northern Ireland. I've been, in my capacity as head of the National Committee, I was over 30 times in China and Taiwan, bringing about a détente between the mainland China and Taiwan, which is now going to the dogs at the moment, but nevertheless, I and my group that I took over, I was over 30 times in China and Taiwan, and I also played a part insofar as peace, quote-unquote peace in the Middle East is concerned, and I promoted the idea of the National Committee of a two-state solution, which is very controversial in certain segments, but I feel that this is the only way out of a big problem before we enter into a disaster. I hope we don't, obviously. So this is, as we say in Hebrew, b'kitzur, in short.
In short. Yeah, many years in short. But I have a question about your capacity in the Latvian survivors, the organization that you're a part of.
Well, yes. What we did after the war here, I was a co-founder of the Jewish survivors of Latvia. We meet every year, we have a newsletter, we meet every year for prayers, remembrance, the Holocaust, etc. You've been there, of course, so that you've been there, one of my sons. Yes, and we keep, as much as possible, we keep together the Jews here in the United States, Latvia, and of course also with Israel. We have counterpart in Israel, and incidentally I was invited by Chabad to come to Oxford Chabad, to speak there, which I did go.
But the Chabad Upper West Side got you first. The Chabad Upper West Side got you first.
So this is again b'kitzur, short.
So I'm curious, given that you've been very involved in Jewish life ever since you were liberated, helping Israel and supporting Israel and supporting Jews publicly and financially, and in your leadership. I'm curious, these days we're seeing a large rise in anti-Semitism across the board, not only in the United States, but around the world. And maybe also anti-Zionism cloaked, or just anti-Semitism cloaked in anti-Israel rhetoric, etc. What message do you have to, in particular, the Jewish people here, who are the parents who are raising their children in this environment in New York, and also the children themselves, who are the next leaders? What advice do you have regarding perhaps Jewish unity, or how they should pursue things?
Jewish unity, which is extremely important. Unfortunately, what we find here very often is Jew fighting Jew. Jew fighting Jew. And the enmity among Jews is I think, is a machala, is a sickness. We have to overcome this hatred of Jew vis-a-vis Jew, not only over here. Well, when I went to Israel in 1950, after the Stern Gang, excuse me for going back, I got a scholarship to go and study in Israel, which I did way back in 1950. Most of you were not even born then. So I've spent almost a year in Jerusalem, and I thought in terms of Aliyah. And what bothered me in Israel was that the Ashkenazi Jews expressed hatred for the Cushim, the Jews, the black Jews from North Africa, the Teimanim, the Yemenites, not so much against the Yemenites, but Jew hatred of a Jew in Israel really turned me off against Aliyah, going to Israel and living in Israel. I just couldn't understand why the Ashkenazi Jews from Europe had this hatred toward what they call the Cushim, the blacks, that were fellow Jews, the Teimanim, the Yemenites. Not so much against the Yemenites as against the Cushim, the Teimanim, but still anti-Teimanim, because the Ashkenazis felt that they are superior for some reason or other. And this hatred really turned me off. That was probably the major reason why I did not go and live in Israel, which I'd hoped before 1950, before I encountered this hatred. And I encounter, unfortunately, I encounter this disrespect between and among Jews here also in the United States. We have to, this is a machala, this is a sickness. We have to overcome it. We have to outreach, because this is going to be our downfall, and we cannot afford this. We must stick together. We must overlook differences, and treat, like we're all brothers and sisters. And I feel very, very strongly about it. I do everything possible in my little capacity that I have to try to overcome this.
Yeah, I actually lived in Israel, as you know, for 2 years almost, and proud to report that the situation may have gotten better.
It has gotten better.
I think so.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank God. And it shouldn't deter anyone from checking out Israel. But certainly this idea of Jewish unity is also important, and the idea of Jewish education, which I know since I was little you were a big advocate of, and in particular being involved in Lincoln Square Synagogue, and your involvement with the Chabad at Oxford, etc., the importance of educating Jewish children in Jewish ways. So what message do you have in particular to people here who have Jewish children about how to continue the Jewish education?
It's important to bear in mind the Jewish history, the ancient Jewish history. I mean, going back all the way to Egypt, the Yetziat Mitzrayim, teaching the history. It's a very noble history. It's a very long and noble history, something that we can be very proud of. This reminds me here, may I read?
Absolutely, it's your book.
Yeah, I have over here.
Benjamin Disraeli, right?
Yes. Comment on the chosen people. Queen Victoria once asked her Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, quote, "What proof can you give me that God really exists?" End of quote. Disraeli, who was a prime minister and a Jew, answered, "The survival of the Jewish people." You see, the survival of the Jewish people. And this is really extremely important. And we're going to survive no matter what. But we don't need other catastrophes. And to avoid catastrophes, we must do everything possible to cherish fellow Jews. We don't have to live with them, necessarily, if you disagree, but a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And that is important. And this is my message. And I did this with my children, bar mitzvah. Actually, which is very interesting, we had a teacher come to us to prepare them for the bar mitzvah, the triplets, for the bar mitzvah. And for the first time, the teacher asked me to speak about my past, because until then I wanted them to grow up normally, not be burdened by the problems that I had during the war. I mean, Jewish problems, obviously. And for the first time, I briefly talked about my past to the triplet sons when they were being prepared for bar mitzvah. And we also enlisted them in the
Rabbi Riskin.
Rabbi Riskin synagogue, where my children went as children, etc., being prepared also for bar mitzvah. He is now lives in Israel, the West Bank, the kibbutz. It was a Lincoln Center synagogue that he was the head of. So the Jewishness was part of their upbringing, even though we were not religious. But I did not discriminate against religious Jews, and I hope that they're not going to discriminate against me.
Certainly not. I want to mention briefly that very recently with Rabbi Levski, standing over there, and with the Rebbetzin Sarah Levski, they came over and we put on tefillin for the first time. You put on tefillin for the first time. And since you were friends with Eli Wiesel going back, and the tefillin that Rabbi Levski brought were actually Eli Wiesel's pair of tefillin. And so this was actually, Eli had told you for so long it's important to write down your story.
Oh yes, Eli was a dear friend of mine, and Eli said, George, you have to put pen to paper, your experiences, you're literate, you can write, it's very important for the Jewish people. And I remember telling Eli, and I have it in here, Eli, I can't live the way you live, thinking and dreaming about the Holocaust 24/7. I just can't do it. So I told him, Eli, we taught at the same time at City College. He was in the Jewish Studies department and I was in the History department. We became very, very close friends. And eventually I capitulated to Eli and I did put pen to paper and I wrote my memoirs.
This is also a message that my grandfather's taught. He taught me very often and a lot, is that it's never too late to do anything. And Eli passed, but you had already started writing your memoirs and you, thank God, published them recently.
Yes.
Finally got it out. And also to put on tefillin on your 91st birthday, you lived till 120. That's also an amazing feat.
And actually, the memoir has been translated to Russian. It is now being translated into Latvian. It will be out in May. And it's also going to be translated into German. So apparently it is of interest.
And finally, I guess another question, just more generally before we get to the audience, is when it comes to sending children to Jewish school and Jewish programs like at Chabad, often the idea drilled at home is that you don't have to do everything, but it's good to do something. It's good to be part of the community, etc.
Yes.
And you've been part of the Jewish community over here for so long, and I wanted to know, what is your hope for not only the Jews who are involved, but also the Jews who haven't yet stepped into the synagogue or into the after-school programs? What's your hope for them in the coming future?
Well, the point is, I'm not a religious Jew, but I'm a Jew. And even for the irreligious, they should acknowledge that there are Jews who have a wonderful heritage, long history, and they should be proud of the fact that they are Jewish. And I am, I don't hide it, but even when I was president of the National Committee for 22 years, I never hid the fact that I was Jewish, no matter where I was, in China or in Taiwan or in Tokyo or in Moscow or wherever, etc. I was always proud of the fact, even though that I'm not religious. I was not brought up in a religious home, but even at home, as a child, I knew I was Jewish. The family didn't hide the fact of being Jewish. It's my identity, my heritage, and I'm very, very proud of my long history, of our long history of the Yishuv, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, and even before.
Right.
Thank you so much for speaking. If anyone has a question, raise your hand. Okay. I'll just repeat your question. I'll start. You had a question, or give you? Okay, I'll give you the mic. Let's go.
Hi, my name is Guy. I have a son here, Daniel.
Speak up.
My son is Daniel. I'm Guy. My son is here, but he's here in conspicuous. So my son Daniel has a daughter who's in the Israeli army, and he also takes some classes here. And he asked me once, after taking a class with Eliyahu, he asked me, why do people hate Jews? So why are we so, why do people hate Jews?
I think part of it is due to envy. Envy. The Jews are the people of the book, and we strive to succeed, which is not the case with many others. And I think in large part it is a matter of envy. The Jews have been successful whenever given the chance, whether it is in academia, whether it's in business, whether it's wherever, in the professions, medicine, physics, Einstein, etc. So.
But you also had Jews. You had Jews that were not successful as well.
There are also Jews who aren't particularly successful business-wise.
Well, not everyone can be successful, but he's still a Jew. He's still a fellow Jew. And I make contributions to all sorts of organizations for Jews who are not successful. But I'm trying to, with my very limited means, to help as much as I possibly can. To the less fortunate, I consider myself to have been very fortunate, despite the troubles I've had in my life. I succeeded in what I decided to do. I wanted to show, it's also for my sake of my family I did it. My parents, my father, my brother, my mother, etc. Yes. Not everyone can be successful. When it comes to the business world, I don't know anything about it. I'm a moron. But when it comes to my profession, I can speak, and I speak globally. Well, before I became 91.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I have the mic, so I'll ask the question. My name is Kale White Hassan, and thank you for the wonderful speech and recounting the events of your life, your miraculous life. And actually, Michael, my son Felix, went to Heschel with you, and he says hello. And I'm also a grandchild of survivors. And I just wanted to, as is Rabbi Eliyahu, and I just wanted to ask you, when you were in your darkest moments in Stutthof and some of the other concentration camps, what was it that motivated you to keep going?
I keep on thinking about it myself. And strange as it may seem, I looked at it, even if I was starving, as if this was a kind of a play, what was going on. For example, when 9 people, I think it was 9 people, were condemned to be hanged for allegedly having stolen some bread, I kept on thinking, how does one hang a human being? It was this imagination I had, etc., trying to find out. It was as absurd as it may sound. It was a kind, as a spectator. I was a spectator trying to think before I actually saw the hanging, etc. How is it going to be? How to hang a human being? Where? How? This, etc. It intrigued me for some reason or other. However sick you may think it is. But this is, it was a kind of a spectacle.
So you kind of dissociated yourself from it.
Yes, it was, yes, very well put. I dissociated myself, very well put. I didn't think about it, yes. Just sitting in a cinema, in a movie house, yes.
Does anyone else have a question? How many more? 2 more? Okay.
Hi, my name is Rivka Hertz, and I'm a member of the community here.
A little louder.
A little louder? Okay. Firstly, I'm a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, so I grew up hearing all the stories that my grandmother really didn't want to tell all her kids growing up. They kind of skipped a generation and they told us. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for Holocaust survivors, and they really have a very special place in my heart. And whenever I meet one, I want to ask for a bracha from them. So, number 1, can you give all of us a bracha in the room? A bracha is a blessing.
Can you give a bracha, a blessing for the room?
Well, I wouldn't be able to do a religious blessing because
No, just from the heart.
Just from the heart.
Well, I bless you all for being fellow Jews, and I have a mission for you to convert those, not necessarily to become religious, but to be proud Jews. To eliminate the antagonism among Jews, because that's going to be our downfall. So we have to do, this is our task, healing the Jewish mind.
Thank you very much. My question to you is, given the state of affairs in the world and in America, there are many people who compare it to the days before the Holocaust and say they see the hatred building and they see the anti-Jewish vibe. And they're wondering how much longer we actually have in America as a safe haven before things turn on us, given our history.
Well, I personally am not all that pessimistic. I remember when I came to the United States, my mother would say how lucky we are to be 3,000 miles away from Europe. Europe is always embroiled in wars and anti-Semitism, so on and so forth. Yes, we're experiencing all sorts of things right now in the United States. But if we stick together and we show what we can contribute to society in the sciences, business, other worlds. I know that this engenders hatred because it's envy, but we make a positive contribution, and we should be proud of the contribution that we make to the United States, and we must be part of the healing process.
We can take one more. I'm sorry if there's.
Hi, Michael. It's good to see you. And Esther's watching, so she must be thinking hello.
Hi, Esther.
You had mentioned that in 1950, when you were in Israel, you felt that there was, disrespect towards non-white Jews from the Ashkenazi Jews. Did you feel from Israelis at that time, because I've heard that there was disrespect towards Ashkenazi Jews and Holocaust survivors, and they didn't want Yiddish to be spoken. Did you feel a sense of disrespect towards your experience
No,
in Israel?
no. That's the first time I hear that there was something like speaking Yiddish or...
Not being allowed, being encouraged to speak Hebrew instead of Yiddish, perhaps.
Yeah.
I haven't heard this before. This is the first time I hear.
You didn't really speak Yiddish anyway.
I didn't speak Yiddish, regretfully, even though I eventually became vice president of the Shalom Aleichem Foundation.
But if we've learned anything, you can still learn it.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, it was Belle Kaufman, the granddaughter of Shalom Aleichem, who I met and said, you know, George, one of these days we want to reorganize the Shalom Aleichem Foundation. I would like you to become part of it, etc. That's fine, you know, I didn't pay much attention. One day I get a phone call saying, you know, George, we have reorganized the foundation and we would like to become the president of the Shalom Aleichem Foundation. So I said, but Belle Kaufman's her name, the granddaughter. I said, Belle, for me it is impossible. First of all, I don't speak Yiddish. She said, George, I don't speak Yiddish either. My granddaughter from Malaya. Second, she said, I said, no, I'm the head of the National Committee and I'm a professor at the university. I can't really do any work. She said, I said, give me a title where I don't have to do any work. Okay, George, you're the vice president of the foundation. That's how it became.
Okay, we can take your guys' question. Last one.
As an adult, have you gone back to either your hometown or to Germany?
Yes, I've gone back to Latvia since 1990. I helped the Latvian Jewish community that's still there. And for my late wife, I established at the Jewish Center in Riga, the Eliyahu Schwab Library, where we collect books dealing with Judaica, Jewish history, the Holocaust, etc. Because there's a very active program of Jewish studies at the University of Riga. And I've been back to, until COVID, but I haven't been back since.
We went together.
Yeah, we went together, but 4 years ago.
Yeah, 4 years ago.
4 years ago, yes, with my son, and they keep on driving me. They want to go back. They just loved it over there. It was my son, and my other twin. Yes, I've been back. I've been back to Germany many times because my research for my PhD took me over there, and I can't hate people for some reason or other. It's alien to me. I mean, I may, dislike. I don't have to associate with some. But hatred is something that is beyond me. And as Ellie used to say, you can't hold the younger generation responsible for what the parents and grandparents do. And I share this.
Thank you. Before everybody goes, we have a few closing remarks. First, I'm going to give it over to Daniel Zamir.
Hi, I'm Daniel Zamir, a junior at Brooklyn Tech and proud to be on the CTeen Leadership Committee. I want to thank Dr. Schwab for sharing his amazing story with us and taking on his journey. Hearing survivor stories firsthand is very powerful and helps us understand what really went on. This past summer, I was privileged to be part of the heritage trip that CTeen offers for all high schoolers. We spent 5 days in Poland, going all over the country and seeing the horrors that occurred firsthand. This really brought everything I've heard and read to a whole new meaning after seeing many of the camps in Poland. We went to Israel for 2 weeks and saw the real end of the story, the Jewish nation and its proud people. The trip was life-changing and I strongly recommend it to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And now, just for some quick announcements and upcoming events, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mayor Backham. I'm with the CTeen Leadership Committee. And I'll be very quick. For all the middle schoolers in the room, we have events every Tuesday evening. It's study support for 6th to 8th graders. And after March, we'll also have fantastic bar and bat mitzvah preparation. For all the high schoolers in the room, we have volunteer events about once a month. The next one will be Knock Knock, Give a Sock, which is helping homeless people in the shelters. And we'll also have a Tu B'Shvat event next week. And our international Shabbaton is coming up the end of February. And it's the entire world CTeen chapters in one city, one area. It's very special. We have some summer programs, as Daniel was saying, the Poland trip. We have a couple others. Feel free to ask Eliyahu, Shayna, Rabbi, and Revitz and Alevsky for more information on those. And for parents, we have study programs. We have a Sunday morning women's study group and a Monday evening course given by Rabbi Kobo, and much more. Find more on the way out, take one of these, and it'll give you all the information that you need. Good night.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming tonight. I'm Eliyahu. I wanted to thank my wife Shayna for putting this all together, and my illustrious in-laws, Rabbi and Shayna. And last but not least, I met Michael a couple years ago, just randomly. We happened to be in the same little shtiebel, and we were praying together, and I just said, hey, what's your deal? Where are you from? What's going on? And from there, we got to know each other. I got to know your dad, and when we heard about your grandfather's story, I thought it was very appropriate for our teenagers in our community to be privy to this, because unfortunately, Dr. Schwab is few and far between, and I think as parents growing up, we had a lot of Holocaust survivors around us, and we kind of maybe took it for granted a little bit that we would always be around and hear their stories. And sometimes we don't realize that these stories are not always going to be here, and unfortunately, as the years go on, and you should be blessed to live many, many more years, but we know the reality. So the more that we expose our children and their friends and the next generation to these stories is crucial for their understanding of who they are and what they're meant to be and become. So I want to thank you guys both very much for that. This evening means a lot to myself. Personally, my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor as well, and he never really liked to share his story. he spoke English perfectly, but preferred to only speak to us in Yiddish. And never heard a word about it until after he passed, and I read his memoirs. So when you're sitting here and saying the stories, it's very powerful for myself, and I'm sure for many of you in the room. Lastly, when you were talking about the Stern Gang and your whole situation, and if you guys don't have the book, I strongly suggest getting the book. It's fascinating, and he writes about the Stern Gang, and he didn't tell this to you before, but he had a whole episode when he tried leaving the gang and he was threatened and all that. So it's fascinating. There's a lot of humor in the book as well. But you're talking about Israel, and you studied in Israel, and I just can't help myself looking at the recent news in Israel, especially over this past Shabbat, where we heard terrible news coming out of there. So I thought it was appropriate to maybe just conclude the evening with a small prayer for Israel, and everybody can say the prayer together. And perhaps taking a little bit of that light that we can bring into the world, taking some good deeds or mitzvahs, and just saying hello, waving hi, like Dr. Schwab said, just having mutual respect for each other, even if we don't agree on everything, is a great way. So on your way out, there's some food, partake in the food, and you can ask, Dr. Schwab, whatever you'd like. And there's some program guides like we mentioned. We also have some candles, and really just trying to think of how you can be there for others and add some more light into the world. So I'm going to ask Chagai Zamir, whose daughter is currently starting her boot camp, I guess, in Israel. And I'm very worried the situation in Israel, and I'm sure she'll be fine, God willing. But we're going to do a special prayer from the book of Psalms, chapter 121, and Chagai will read it in Hebrew, and I'll read it in English right after. Please rise, if you can.
שיר למעלות עושה עיני אל הרים מעין יבוא עזרי מעם אדוני יעשה שמיים וארץ אל ייתן למות לרגליך אל ינום שמריך הנה לא יקנו ולא ישן שומר ישראל אדוני שמריך אדוני צלך על ידיך ימיניך ידומם השמש לא יכחה ובעירך בלילה אדוני ישמרך מכל רע ישמור את נפשך אדוני ישמרך צדדיך בואך עתה ועד עולם.
Thank you. And I'll just read in English quickly. A song of ascents. I lift my eyes to the mountain from where my help will come. My help will come from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth, who will not let your foot falter. Your guardian does not slumber. Indeed, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your protective shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. He will guard your soul. The Lord will guard you going and your coming from now and for all time. And we pray for world peace and peace all over the world for our brothers and sisters in Israel, but really for any person who's going through any trouble. It's enough time, and I think we'll conclude with the Shema, and then everyone is free to go. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Shem Kivod Olam Vaed. Thank you so much for coming, and a big round of applause for Dr. Schwab and Michael. Okay, we'll come over and speak to you for a minute. If you'd like to come over and say hello to Dr. Schwab, please do so. Grab some food on the way out. How did you hear? Why is Daddy crying?
Yeah.
Where are you going?
If she were here, I would like to see her. You were here, but she's in San Diego.